everybody. Really appreciate you for being here tonight. And if you haven't registered or write your name down in front, we encourage you to write your name down so you can get an email whenever we have another event like this. So tonight it's about the growing up fatherless, and we have Karen with us. I'm the executive and signing officer for Men Issues Awareness on York University campus. And I'll encourage you to go on our Facebook also and add and encourage other people to come and join as well. And also would like to.
Well, yeah, so I wanted to give just like a little bit of perspective. I'm Noam, as Betty said a minute ago, and I run the Students in Support of Free Speech actually at York University as well. And we started MIA together here because, I mean, me particularly, because I understand that this is a really, not only is it an integral issue that everyone should be caring about, but it is a free speech issue as well. And something that displayed that to me quite clearly was last night, I was postering for this event, putting up posters, at York University as one would. And while I was putting up a poster, an individual just walked up right in front of me and tore it down in front of my face and ignored me as if I didn't exist. He walked by my friend and I while we were postering and tore down a few more as well. And we had no idea how to deal with that situation. We were so dumbfounded that somebody would just walk up and have the gall to do it in front of us. And it just solidified further that this issue is something that we need to bring to York University, and these voices need to be heard. So we'd like to introduce Ms. Karen Strawn, our speaker today. She will discuss the consequences of growing up fatherless and how we can empower fathers and other male role models to do better for their children. And a little bit of background on her. She has devoted the last 7 years to developing an understanding of the social, cultural, psychological, and biological dynamics behind gender role enforcement and sexual politics. Her YouTube channel, Girl Writes What, has over 180,000 subscribers and more than 16 million video views. And her work has been presented in high school and university classrooms in the US, Canada, and Ireland. So thank you so much for coming tonight. And without further ado, Karen Strawn.
Thank you, Karen.
All right.
Okay, hi everyone. You can all hear me? Okay. First off, I'm talking about fatherlessness, and that's something that it can happen a variety of ways. So it can happen through divorce and family court situation where a man's parental rights aren't particularly respected. It can happen from a woman choosing to start a family without a male partner, and it can happen through a mother being widowed. So there are a lot of different ways that this can happen, and not all of them are avoidable. But with that said, and also please bear with me if my voice is a little touchy. I had an altercation with some walnuts yesterday, and I'm still not quite there back where I need to be yet. So, to begin, there is a word in British slang that's been around since about the mid-19th century. It describes a particular group of people. Chavvy is the word. And the group it described was a perceived, unruly, boorish, criminally oriented, economically unproductive, antisocial underclass of youth. And it was particularly associated with young men. And it derived from the Romani word chavi, meaning child. Its definition within its modern iteration, chav, is considered by etymologists to be a backronym. It's a constructed acronym that's been put together to fit an existing word. In this case, the backronym CHAV means council housed and violent. While there were no council houses back in the 1860s, the word now effectively means exactly the same thing. back when it was popularized. Synonyms might be hoodlum, lout, goon, delinquent, hooligan, gangster, punk, thug. These words all conjure similar images. Young, male, violent, angry, uneducated, unmotivated, and unproductive, of poor moral character, antisocial, and economically stunted. But chav and its backronym status within the modern parlance might prove to be insightful. Council housing as a major public works project began at the end of World War I, providing solid, spacious, safe, and affordable housing, primarily to poor and struggling veterans and their families. Over the course of a little more than half a century, council housing morphed into cheap, subsidized housing almost exclusively for single mothers and their children. How interesting then that it was only after the Oxford English Dictionary made chav its first ever word of the year back in 2004, a few decades after council housing had become men deserts filled with single mothers and fatherless children, that people began to spread the myth that chav actually stands for council housed and violent. And that this myth has stuck in the collective consciousness as something that's actually true. And just so the ladies don't feel left out, there's a feminized version of the word, chavette, just in case anyone was thinking I'm not equal opportunity. So what does chav tell us? Noting that the statistics, nothing that the statistics don't. According to Civitas UK, being raised without a father leads to a 5 to 32 times greater chance of a whole host of social maladies, including but not limited to going to prison, committing suicide, having behavioral problems, becoming a rapist, running away from home, abusing drugs and alcohol, and dropping out of high school. Other sources indicate similar risks regarding opting out of post-secondary education, having sex early, contracting an STI, being incarcerated or institutionalized as a juvenile, being physically or sexually abused, becoming a victim of street violence, becoming a perpetrator of violence, having children outside of a relationship, and becoming a teen parent. One study in Britain in the 1990s found that children were up to 33 times more likely to suffer abuse from a live-in boyfriend or stepfather than from their biological dad. The modern definition of chav as council housed and violent appears to be the result of a collective intuition based on the layperson's observation of what happens when children, particularly boys, are increasingly deprived of the day-to-day meaningful influence of fathers. And I'm using the UK as an example here because there's no racial complication here to muddy the water. Only 3% of the British population are Black. The vast majority of young men referred to as chavs in the UK are in fact white. And a recent survey reveals that young white men out of all identifiable groups have the worst public approval rating of anyone. Perceptions of white men in their 20s in Britain were in fact less than half as favorable as the least next popular group, Black Caribbean men, and less than 1/3 as positive as Pakistani men born in their 20s. Scores were based on people's perceptions of pro and antisocial traits among different populations. Pro-social meaning things like being polite, helping others, being productive, being intelligent, being honest, and working hard. And antisocial meaning things like being violent, getting drunk, being sexually irresponsible, stealing, being dishonest, and using illegal drugs. You know, all those things that are correlated with growing up without a dad. These scores jive with actual real-world statistics on NEETs, NEET standing for not in education, employment, or training, While young white women and young white men in the UK are at the moment roughly equally likely to be considered neat, the majority of the former are neat and raising kids out of wedlock. A significant portion of the latter are neat and raising Cain. And whether you're a chav, a chavette, or a single mother raising little future chavs, you're more likely to have yourself been raised in a household without a father. Wash, rinse, repeat. Does every fatherless family result in disaster for the children? No. There are tons of kids who grow up without their dads who manage to sidestep most or even all of the negative consequences associated with fatherlessness. But I want you all to consider this, and this is what lets me sleep at night as a lifelong smoker. Fewer than 10% of us will ever get lung cancer. Even so, the risk of lung cancer is 30 times higher than in people who have never smoked. And our governments in the West have put a lot of money and effort into discouraging smoking, with varying results depending on how stubborn the person is, because they see it as damaging to individual health and to wider society. Not only do they pour money into awareness of the fact that it's a health risk, they've increased regulation of this legal product and applied serious financial disincentives in the form of sin taxes and place strict limits on how it can be distributed and where and in what circumstances it can be consumed. And yet our governments, despite advocates, think tanks, and lobby groups on both sides of the political aisle, increasingly sounding the alarm over the problem of fatherlessness, they continue to fail to take any substantive action. Certainly, fewer than 10% of children in fatherless homes will run away from home as a child. But they're still 35 times more likely to do so than a kid with both parents. So, our governments in the West just continue to ignore the problem, and not just ignore it, but tolerate it and subsidize it. They subsidize the ongoing creation of fatherless families. And the problems associated with fatherlessness are not restricted to the dire outcomes that I've listed above. Children raised in fatherless homes are 3 times more likely to report feeling sad most or all of the time. They're more likely to have difficulties in their relationships with their mothers. They're more likely to do poorly in school, even if they don't drop out, and to be suspended, even if they aren't expelled. Their mothers are more likely to report being frequently stressed out, and are 30% more likely to have no idea where their kids are most or all of the time. Single mothers are 60% more likely than those in intact families to have too high expectations of their children, probably out of necessity. The largest single demographic of people who abuse and neglect children are mothers parenting alone. And neglect in this case can be a misleading word. Some forms of neglect are not a matter of just a parent being unable to cope with keeping up with the demands of life and kids. Some parents engage in targeted neglect. That is, they take proper care of some of their kids and single some of them out for inadequate care. Abuse can fall into this category too. Erin Pitsey, founder of the first domestic violence shelter in the world, described her mother as targeting her and her brother for abuse and vicious cruelty, while her fraternal twin sister remained untouched, was spared. And she said this was because she and her brother looked like their father, and their mother hated their father. Targeted neglect, which can be incredibly extreme, is a form of intentional abuse. And when it's perpetrated by single mothers, The child targeted is typically one that reminds them of a father she particularly detests. Fatherlessness is detrimental to both boys and girls, but it hits boys hardest. Girls, even ones with abusive or neglectful mothers, or mothers who aren't exactly someone anyone would want to grow up and be like, will spend much of their early lives around women who are caring, competent, and nurturing, examples of self-actualized womanhood. They'll have babysitters, daycare providers, preschool, kindergarten, and elementary school teachers who will almost always be women. Those women, having been girls themselves at some point, will more readily relate to girls than to boys. Fatherless girls will, for the most part, grow up seeing school as a girl thing because it's geared toward their preferences, behavior, and learning style, and it's populated, particularly in the early years, by women. Fatherless boys, on the other hand, may have to wait until grade 8 math to have a competent, caring, and nurturing man in their lives on a regular basis. And by then, it's often too late to instill in boys any sense that school is a boy thing. Without positive expressions of masculinity in the home or at school when they're young, they will typically seek out a masculine identity from their same age peers or slightly older ones, and from popular culture, which is rife with extreme and caricaturized versions of masculinity. They will have spent most of their formative years in a school setting that views any form of masculine expression as harmful on its face. Among Blacks in the US, the community where single motherhood is most prevalent there, women are more than 2/3 of those enrolled in post-secondary education. Young Black men in America are more likely than anyone else to commit crimes and to be incarcerated. And while there may be some racial problems going on, certainly this would be corroborative evidence that fatherlessness uniquely and negatively impacts boys. The fatherless rate, the out-of-wedlock birth rate in the Black community in the US right now is hovering around 70%. So what is it that fathers do that is so important to the children to put them on the right path in life? First off, there's the general stuff that they do that anyone else could. They increase the household income. They increase the amount and quality of adult supervision. By their presence alone, they take some of the pressures off the other parent, meaning the other parent is less stressed and more capable of handling the demands on their time, energy, and emotions. Children's time spent in parental company increases when there are two in the home. What is it that men in particular bring to the table? Well, they tend on average to, and I'm speaking in generalizations here, to employ a different parenting style than mothers do. Men tend to set fewer boundaries for kids, but to enforce them more diligently and consistently. This parenting style is associated with healthier and fuller development of empathy in children and an augmentation in children's ability to delay gratification. That's my phone going off. Sorry, why not Zoidberg? The rough and tumble play men are more likely to engage in with kids. Helps them stretch their awareness of the body's ability and limitations. They learn early on what hurts themselves and others and what doesn't. And this form of play increases their body confidence and helps them develop a sense of anti-fragility. They learn, in effect, that they're not easily broken, and that helps them develop the confidence required to face and overcome challenges in life, including those they will face on the playground. Men push kids away rather than pulling them close, and that's not a bad thing. They encourage kids to play further away, to try new things, and to keep trying even when their first tries might result in scrapes and bruises. They teach kids the value of rubbing a little dirt in it and carrying on when they're not seriously hurt. their relative sanguinity in the face of a skin knee or other childhood calamity helps kids learn to self-soothe, calm down, and see that not everything that stings or throbs or is sore is a catastrophe. They encourage kids. And by encourage, I mean they teach them that they can be courageous. I don't know how many times I've seen parents at a playground with their child, and the dad is hollering, "Go on, you can climb higher, you can do it." And the mom is saying, "Don't climb too high." So we really get a mix of parenting styles that is a push and a pull, and that really contributes, both of them contribute to the child actually having a sense of safety and well-being and security. They model healthy forms of masculinity that provide a roadmap for boys as they're growing up, and provide an example for their daughters as to the kinds of men that they might want to invite into their lives when they grow up. And perhaps more importantly, father love, regardless of the father's own conformity to masculine norms or his lack thereof, is significantly correlated with the healthy development of masculinity in boys. So even just being there and loving the kid. And what is it that fathers in particular bring to children? The protective effect of the mere presence of the biological father more than offsets the risk posed by the tiny minority of biological fathers who are 33 times more likely to be the mother's new boyfriend or husband than the children's biological father. More than this, an intact family that remains consistently intact from the child's birth onward provides a stability that helps children thrive, even if neither parent is perfect, which is a really good thing because most of us aren't perfect. Some research indicates that when it comes to positive outcomes, having two parents who consistently model a healthy relationship with each other in front of their children is more important than quality time by either parent with any of the kids. The modeling of a positive relationship can continue even after a divorce, when both parents are committed to co-parenting and prepared to work together as a team. So even if you're divorced, all is not lost. Girls who live with their biological fathers reach menarche later than those who don't, something like 3/4 of a year later. Menarche is the onset of menstruation, and they tend to wait longer before becoming sexually active. The evolutionary hypothesis explaining this is that father absence triggers in a girl's body a response geared to coping with living in a war zone, which would be the primary cause of father absence through our history. The reasoning is that if dad is gone, the environment must be unsafe, so the girl is primed physically and through emotional triggers and impulses to seek out another adult male protector. Boys who live with their biological fathers tend to be more rule conscious and to have a more positive self-concept. When deprived of a father, boys will look to their same age and slightly older peers. And depending on where you live, this might not be a big problem when a boy lives in a safe neighborhood full of mostly intact families. But because there are boys around him who have involved fathers, and those fathers may set a good example for him or even take him under their wing. But when you grow up in an inner city or in one of those British men deserts of council houses where adult males are virtually non-existent, it's a lot more difficult for any given boy to resist the recruitment of his similarly fatherless peers into all kinds of unsavory and harmful behaviors. As with many things, good and bad, the trajectory is not a linear one. Success creates opportunities, and over time, repeated successes generate disproportionately more and better opportunities. The same is true for fatherlessness in a community, in the degree to which it generates waywardness and dysfunction, which then worsens the impact on the fatherless boys in that community. The more fatherless kids there are in a given neighborhood, the worse the impact is going to be on all of them. And while girls are less negatively impacted in terms of practical outcomes in adulthood, for a variety of reasons, boys really do struggle. So troubling is the case in the UK that a white working class boy starting kindergarten today has the lowest likelihood among all children in his country of finishing high school or attending university. How can this be? Because similarly economically situated minority boys benefit from policy initiatives and social awareness and societal empathy based on their minority status. White boys from higher income brackets are more likely to live with both their parents, or if they don't, are buffered somewhat from the worst of the effects by their socioeconomic status. It is the most socioeconomically and institutionally marginalized boys who feel the greatest impacts from fatherlessness. And right now, because there are no efforts, particularly for white boys, to help them out because they're white, those are the boys that are going to be the most institutionally marginalized and abandoned. Feminists have for decades, and others, pushed the idea that family structure is unimportant. The female separatists of the second wave have decried marriage as the enslavement of women by men as domestic servants and the family as exploitation of women by men as broodmares. Their ideology and their activism sought to place all of the power to determine the conditions of the family in the hands of women. Access for women to sex and motherhood at will without restriction or stigma. Access for women to contraception and abortion at will without restriction or stigma. Complete marital liberty for women, the freedom to marry who they want and to divorce for any reason whatsoever, including no reason at all. And finally, de facto ownership of women by women of children and the means to extract financial responsibility from fathers without providing any reciprocal benefit. They demanded for women the ability to have children whether married or not, with or without the father's voluntary consent, without social censure, and the ability to divorce without cause while retaining the primary asset of the marriage, the children. It ain't the house, it ain't the car, it's the kids that's the primary asset. And then continue to extract the monetary investment of the father of those children. You think these are your kids, John? Only for as long as Jennifer is willing to let you believe that. At the same time, with the help of flummoxed traditionalists, they've consistently advocated to maintain, enforce, or even increase paternal responsibilities of men, the monetary ones, even as their efforts marginalize the non-monetary contributions fathers make toward their children's well-being. They have consistently concealed the gradual transfer of all sexual and reproductive rights solely into the jurisdiction of women under the guise of advocating for different or all kinds of families, or under the mask of protecting women and children from abusive men. And while alternative models of family can indeed be valid and healthy, and are, and abusive fathers do indeed exist, this does not justify the wholesale marginalization of the relationships between fathers and their children. In the UK, 20 to 30% of non-resident fathers have not seen their children in the last year. An additional 20 to 40% see their kids less than once per week. This is unacceptable. What is even more unacceptable is that in so many of these cases, the fathers involved are capable and willing, sometimes eager, to make that meaningful human contribution to the lives of their children, but are prevented from doing so by combative or recalcitrant mothers and a system that enables, encourages, and even rewards them for it. And I really hate to make the male utility argument, the men should be useful argument, but we really ignore fatherlessness at our peril. Our entire system is built and maintained on the excess productivity of men. A recent report out of New Zealand calculated the cumulative lifetime tax contributions of men and women over a typical lifetime. Did you know that in New Zealand, the only demographic of people who ever achieve a positive balance on that spreadsheet are men ages 40 to 79? Only men ages 40 to 79 have paid more taxes in than they've taken out. By age 65, women have pulled out about 50,000 more in taxpayer dollars than they've put in taxes. And by age 80, they will have consumed $150,000 more than they've put in. You would think governments and economists would be able to put two and two together and at least act out of callous self-interest to solve a problem that, if left unchecked, will eventually bring the entire economic edifice down. And yet every part of our culture seems bent on handicapping the next generation of boys and the current generation of men, all the way down to enabling and encouraging father absence, the very thing that will turn the people we will all be blindly dependent on, most of us without even realizing it or appreciating it, but into people who will inevitably cost society more in policing, services, welfare, healthcare, rehabilitation, and everything else. It's clear to me that fatherhood is important for children, for society, and believe it or not, even for mothers. We want our kids to grow up into decent, well-adjusted adults, capable and contributing to their societies. And yet our entire system is still in denial regarding one thing that could solve or mitigate a multitude of costly problems that place burdens on the system and cause real suffering in individuals' lives. All we have to do to turn the tide is to see dads as dads. Not as abusers, not as superfluous, not as an inconvenience for mom, not as the rivals or the enemies of mothers, just as dads. Just as dads, just see them as dads. Recognize their unique positive contribution in the lives of their children and put our support, our policies, and our laws behind that. And that's all I have to say. Thanks very much. Are there going to be questions?
Yeah, I mean, you can come to the microphones if you have any questions. Make sure you speak in.
You got to come down to the mics.
Thanks, Karen. My question would be, what you left off on was talking about supporting dads. Well, what would that look like concretely? I think we've probably forgotten what that looks like by now.
Well, I think honestly, you know, there's been this. It has to happen on multiple levels. It has to. We need that default rebuttable presumption of shared parenting in our legislation. We need to uproot the policies that we have. Technically, we use a best interest of the child policy when it comes to determining custody, but most of the policy around that is based on some work that was done in the 1980s by a feminist researcher who, I guess her theory was that when children get confused and stressed out and they just don't, they don't do well early on if they spend reasonable amounts of time with both parents. They need the stability of one home and visitation with dad. And so that's essentially what all of our policies are based on. These are the training materials for judges and guardians ad litem and all of the rest. So we need to adjust that. We need to start pushing back against things like in schools when they used to have sort of daddy-daughter dances and things like that, or father-daughter dances. They got rid of those because it upsets, or it might upset girls who don't have fathers. And what we really need to do in that case is there was a school, I forget where, somewhere down in the US, where they had a father's picnic with the kids, father-children picnic. And they solved the problem of the kids with no fathers by putting out feelers in the community and asking other men to come in and do that. And they needed 50, and they got 500 men showing up, which was really, really amazing. So we need to actually, I know it must feel bad for a kid without a dad, right? To be reminded that somebody has something that they don't, right? And something that is valuable that they don't have. But I think this whole idea of trying to spare those feelings is further marginalizing fathers in sort of the social sphere. It's taking our culture and changing it to the point where most people just don't think it's a big deal for a kid to not have a dad. And I'd really like to get beyond that. So yeah, and definitely shared parenting. I mean, and it's not going to happen according to a lot of people because there's no money in it for lawyers. Because when you have a winner takes all system, that's the makings of a combative divorce and a lot of trips to court and a lot of expensive mediation and a lot of lawyers' fees. And when you have a situation where neither parent is walking away with nothing, then they're less likely to fight with each other. And then on top of that, they're more likely to be able to co-parent properly and get along. So, I mean, it just seems like we're doing everything backwards. So.
Hey, Karen, first
Hi.
of all, I'd like to say you're awesome, first of all. And second of all, my question has to do with men who are around single parent families, like a brother of a woman who has a child with an absentee father, or just friends of said woman or whatever. And like, how might they, be a good role model and sort of help this forward momentum as well of what you were saying in support of single fathers?
Well, mentoring is really triage, right? It's that whole idea of, if the injury can't be prevented, well, then you got to do something about it. And that's really what we need to actually have more of that as well. There are a whole bunch of really, really good mentoring programs in the United States, where you have men who are fathers themselves, mentoring kids who don't have fathers and bringing them into the family setting and all of that stuff. So those would be some really good things. And uncles, brothers, cousins, like all of those things. It would be great if they could fill the entire gap. They can't, but they can certainly help in that way. Yeah. You're messing with the stuff, Robert.
All right,
Stop messing
is this good? Can you hear me?
I can hear you, but you're standing right there. So
Well, I had a question because you make kind of 2 points. One point is what you referred to as the male utility argument, where men produce more, they give more economic benefit in terms of tax dollars in New Zealand than women over a lifetime. And you also make the point that men need to be more involved with their families, right? That fathers need to be more involved with their families. And I'm just wondering how, I'm just thinking of something such as paternity leave for fathers, which I think would go very far to expand like early childhood bonding and things like that, which is so important. How we can reconcile having something like that, which would be a financial drain on the system, right? If fathers are more involved in the home, there's a possibility they might be less involved with work and be less productive. And I'm just wondering how you foresee,
Reconciling the two
those
points?
things. Yeah.
Well, I think, if we're going to be honest, I think that if everybody had the ability to sort of choose how their, if you had two-parent families, if those families had to make the decision themselves, I think most of them would sort of about 80% of them would fall into a more traditional way of doing things, with the man being the primary breadwinner, the woman being the secondary breadwinner, and the one who takes on more at home. So
can I ask just why you say that? What?
It's evolutionary reasons. I could go into it, but it would take a long time. It's really, there are a whole bunch of things going on in our bodies and in our brains that we're not even aware of that lead me to believe that would probably be the case. But when you look at, there are going to be a certain number of men who would really want to take on the primary role at home, and a certain number of women who would really want to take on the primary role outside the home. And for those women, if they want children, they're actually going to have to change their expectations, because childless women who've never been married out-earn childless men who've never been married. That's been true since the 1980s. So when you compare apples to apples rather than, librarians to underwater welders, right? So we have this situation where we have a certain number of people who would really like to do things in a little bit backwards to where they have been. And those women can be absolutely just as economically productive as any man, or more so. So, I mean, it really is just a matter of, I would love to have paternity leave. I would love to have parental leave for people who adopt kids. Right. But it does come with a cost. And right now, what we're doing is we're kneecapping the people who are going to pay off that debt. It is men who are going to be more, even if they take their paternity leave, they're still probably going to be more economically productive on average than women.
Sorry, why?
Because women are more likely to want to stay home even after their maternity leave runs out. Right. I mean, a lot of women do. And there's a significant number of educated women who reduce to part-time or drop out of the workforce altogether within 10 years of getting their credentials. So it's a significant problem how do you parse that with subsidized education for women? So, I mean, these are not easy problems to solve. But I definitely would like paternity leave to be a thing. But I still think that, honestly, what we're doing right now is we're making it so that the next generation of our economic engine, we're actually handicapping them. And they're less likely to go to school. And if women are going to want the lives that they want, and women do make choices that are different from men, and most of those choices are based on having a nicer, even if they don't have kids, having a nicer work-life balance, spending more time doing things that they want, going on vacation, seeing their families and their friends and stuff. And men are the ones who are putting in more hours. And on top of that, the types of work that they do. I don't see women up in cherry pickers fixing the power lines after an ice storm. You just don't see it. So we're looking at, and sure, you don't necessarily need to go to get a PhD to do that as a young man, but you certainly need to not be in prison or addicted to drugs. So, I mean, we're really, really, really going to have a problem. Give it another maybe 2 generations and and the government might actually notice it. So.
I'm sorry, can I ask a
Sure.
follow-up? I missed the point when you were talking about men working out on the power lines, right? It's uncommon to see women, and Then you mentioned prisons. I missed how.
Well,
to
if
connect.
if this generation of boys is going to be more likely to go wayward, right? To not be somebody who wants to even necessarily work. They're not going to be up in that power line. If they're incarcerated as a juvenile, if they're addicted to drugs, these are all things that are linked to growing up without a dad, right? So, and the more and it increases generationally because kids who grow up without dads are more likely to produce fatherless children. So it's only just going to get to be a bigger and bigger and bigger problem.
Sorry, I still, there's something maybe that I'm missing, maybe because, I'm thinking about like World War II, where women joined the workforce and did all these like male roles, like going up on the power lines, like you said, and I think that.
Do you think most women would want to do that?
I don't know. I would have to ask. I would like to do.
I mean,
I
they
don't
have
know
the
if most men-
opportunity. They have the opportunity to do those things now.
Right. I don't
And
know
they
if most
don't.
men want to be on the power lines either. I don't know, and I don't want to make a claim that I don't.
Well,
know about.
they're more likely to do it. We know that because they're more likely to do it, right? They're more willing to do it because just look around, right? Men are more willing to do those jobs. And you may say that's unfair economic pressure on them. Maybe it is. But women certainly haven't stepped up and just gone all gung-ho going into to work in the sewers and sanitation and at the dump and collecting garbage and all of those kind of dirty, nasty, dangerous jobs. They just have not stepped up. They stepped up during wartime. Well, that's an exigent circumstance. That's an emergency. Right? A woman will do all kinds of things in an emergency, right? That she wouldn't choose to do on a normal day. So.
Okay. Thank you. Oh, sorry. Thank you.
Hi.
Hi.
I am a undergraduate psychology student, actually right here at York.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm very interested in men's mental health, particularly lowering the male suicide rate, which is
Right.
obviously quite high. And I'm interested in your opinion in the basic approach to men's mental health right now is very feminist theory based, the theory of patriarchy and toxic
God.
masculinity, and I know a huge eye roll.
I know. What a great way to help men feel better about life. Tell them they're toxically masculine and they are the problem. They're not only their own problem, they're everybody else's too.
Yeah, that's I was, wanted to kind of bring that up. Just earlier today, I saw a thread on Twitter that was all about, basically the conclusion was we need to redefine masculinity and kind of all this stuff. And something I noticed was that the ones who were claiming that masculinity needs to be redefined were women and not necessarily men. So I was interested, I was curious in your opinion, because I do respect your opinion quite a bit about like maybe the good or the bad or the ridiculous of, feminist theory towards men's mental health.
Well, I would always give the devil their due. Feminists aren't wrong about absolutely everything. There are extremes of masculinity, just like there are extremes of femininity that can be harmful to a man and to other people. I would say the feminine extreme would be in the borderline personality disorder, cluster B traits. That would sort of be toxic femininity in its way. But no, I don't think, like, we depend on masculinity. And the whole idea that boys need to be drugged up in order to be able to sit still in a classroom because, hey, you know, we got rid of recess because people skin their knees at recess and the school's worried about liability and all of this. Like, all of that is just absolutely awful. And I hate the idea that boys are, that boyness is somehow a pathology. It's not, right? And I grew up around some really rambunctious boys, and I acted quite a bit like that myself. So, yeah, it's very upsetting to me. So,
Okay. Yeah, thank you very much.
thanks.
Thank you so much for this, the talk. It was really good. I go on the MGTOW subreddit a lot, and I read a lot of the posts there. Some are pretty crazy, some are pretty interesting. Well, I see that like the subreddit's growing rapidly, and I feel like a lot of men see that subreddit, and it's kind of like something you can't unsee. It's really difficult. It's like once you're there, you're just there. But then I see like in society how also like we still have the Me Too movement, and it's like it feels like the situation is not really improving. I was just wondering, like, when do you think we'll reach a point where politicians don't have to be so politically correct? When can they actually be able to maybe speak against groups like feminism? You know what I mean? Like, why would we ever reach that point?
Well, that's up to us, right? And I mean, I was discussing this with somebody, I forget exactly when, it was sometime on this trip. But when you look at feminism, it was never a grassroots movement. It was always extremely well funded by wealthy people. Even, and I'm not going into conspiracies about the Rockefeller Foundation and the Frankfurt School and all of that. That's all neither here nor there. The suffragette unions in the UK had more funding than the Labour Party at the time. So, I mean, they've always been well funded. And, but the men's rights movement is actually going to have to be a ground up movement, because politicians aren't going to be paying attention until we force them to. And so there need to be enough people on the ground making enough noise to force them to do it. Feminism's been an easy sell all along. I mean, you may think, oh, those women had to struggle so long and so hard and they had to protest and all of this stuff, right? But when you look at the actual process of the changes that they made over the time frame that they made them, and the fact that most of the resistance against the feminist movements most of the heaviest resistance came from other women who were like, you're not going to force this on us. When you look at that, you know, it was a top-down sell. This is going to have to be a bottom-up form of coercing our government to take action and to pay attention. And I don't go to our MGTOW.
Okay.
I've heard it's pretty hardcore.
It's hard. It's super hardcore.
I'm not scared, just saying.
No, to be honest, you're okay. From women in general, like from all the popular female speakers, you're the most well-liked, and which is,
I'm the least hated.
yeah, that's the way I would describe it, because they just hate
I'm
all
the
women.
least worst of them.
Yeah, no, for sure. But like the thing is, when I go online and I read YouTube comments, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's like 10 years ago you'd read something completely different, but I feel like the tides are changing a little bit. But
Well, at least on YouTube.
yeah, on YouTube, but it says a lot. Like on Facebook, we can now like certain perspectives you wouldn't see 10 years ago. Now it's more common to see like a post that has 1,000 likes.
Yeah.
That's completely like against.
Warren Farrell did an interview with, I forget who, some Fox News or something like that on the boy crisis in relation to the Florida school shooting. And it got like 5 million shares or something like that. So, you know, it's changing. It's starting to shift, but it's coming from the bottom up. And politicians will do what they do, and what they do to get reelected. So what needs to happen is they don't. There are some honest politicians, but not very many, and they aren't going to prioritize their integrity over their ability to get reelected. So it really needs to be. We need to make enough awareness and change and activate the population to the point where a politician striking down or vetoing a shared parenting bill is going to. That's going to be political death for him.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Thank you.
Hello.
Oh, well, thanks for coming. I just have a simple question continuing from the lady before me.
Mm-hmm.
Before I start that, I believe, men are the source of production in society.
Sorry?
Men are the source of production in society, as you were saying, but I also believe that women are they also enhance that production. Wherever you hire women, the productivity of that department or organization goes up because women are more focused than men.
They have different talents.
Yeah. And I also believe they do deserve that leave, that maternity leave. But as for men, what I can understand is that why would men deserve a maternity leave? Because the time they're going to spend with a newborn baby, they cannot make that connection with the baby. It's going to take years for them to make connection with their newborn child. What makes you think that their paternity leave will make that connection in 2 weeks with their baby?
Well, bonding is a complicated process, right? And oxytocin is a big part of it. And mothers have they have an advantage in that. They carried the baby in their body. The baby listened to mom's voice through the uterus. All of those things, right? But fathers do. They are capable of bonding with even tiny babies. And particularly if we'd all get over our pedophile hysteria and allow men to have skin-to-skin contact. So shirtless man, naked baby, all of those things. That's particularly important. So, honestly, maybe some men wouldn't be able to bond, but I think that you're shortchanging men if you think that they would not be able to bond with their newborn. Men have physiological changes that occur, hormonal changes that occur in their body the moment that they learn that their partner is pregnant in anticipation of the birth. Their testosterone levels go slightly down, their vasopressin levels, I believe, go up, and they have, so all of the hormonal changes that occur during a pair bonding experience occur in both men and women when there's a baby involved, right? So, dads do feel close to their babies, so.
Well, because I think it's going to take years for them to bond. The mother can, as you said. But
Well, the bond is almost instant with the mother,
Yeah.
Unless she does something to screw it up. But yeah, no, I think honestly, there's enough research out there showing that men actually do form a bond with their children even quite early. So
Well, the last thing they can do is just help their newly born.
they can
baby
also,
to
they can.
hospital and stuff.
Well, they can do a lot of hands-on care too, and help out and get up with the baby when mom's too tired and the baby needs to eat. Bring the baby into the bed if mom's breastfeeding.
Yeah.
Right. So things like that, right? And doing all those things together also it brings mom and dad together as well. So
Thank you so much.
How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
All right.
You're going to have to crouch down to talk into that mic.
Or just push it up.
Oh, there we go.
So I just wanted to respond with regards to the political action. Basically, there was a petition that was sent out to the Attorney General of Canada, Jody Raybould Wilson, and she did give a reply on the on shared parenting. She basically said that there are more fathers that are stepping up, but politicians like her, like you said, they're very hard to convince to change their role. Basically, she replied basically saying that she believes that there's more research to say that there's shared parenting isn't in the best interest of the child. And she also replied basically saying that there is a concern for parents who would be domestically violent towards the family. And it's the same eye roll I have. And generally speaking, they put it onto, they say that the federal portion of it is responsible for the country and the Divorce Act, but it's the provincial section that actually has more responsibility for each individual case.
Right.
And one of the things that I'm wondering is, I've been reading a lot, been doing a lot of research on a gentleman named Dr. Craig Childers. I don't know if you've heard of him.
I think so, yeah.
And he's basically taken a role to say that it's not so much the courts that he feels is entirely responsible, because the courts rely mostly on assessments.
Policy and
Yeah.
assessments and the training of the people who are making the assessments. Yeah.
Exactly. So the question, I guess, would be, should we be putting more pressure on people such as the psychologists and the other people who are responsible for giving these assessments, in order to make sure that they are doing proper assessment?
Well, the training needs to change,
Yes.
right? The training of all of these people who contribute to the decision, and the policy around it needs to be completely rewritten. So the evidence that shared parenting is bad for kids is absolutely ridiculous. There is no evidence that shared parenting is bad for kids. It's actually the opposite. As long as the parents are able to get along. It's only in an abuse situation or an extremely combative situation that shared parenting would be detrimental to the children.
Well, in most cases, the parents that are going to court already can't agree anyway.
That's right. That's right. And, you know, the rebuttable presumption, and this is the thing too, right? Because people say all the time that the court decisions, even if the courts are biased against fathers, it doesn't matter, because most people make the decisions about custody and separation of assets and things like that and child support outside of the court. They either sort it out on their own, or they, you know, have lawyers who help them sort it out, or they go through a mediation process or maybe a case conference, right? And it never goes to court, and a judge isn't the one who decides. But you think those decisions that are being made in those courtrooms don't trickle down into the advice that people's lawyers are giving them as to what they can expect to be the outcome if it goes to court? That's what a case conference is for. You sit down with a judge, you tell your whole spiel, the other side tells their whole spiel, and then the judge tells you, well, here's how it's likely to go if it goes to court. Right. So you can't say, and the lawyers are going to be telling the fathers, well, you know, she's being generous with the assets, just let her have the kids, or, you know, she's going to make trouble, or if you pursue custody, or reasonable custody, or 50-50 custody, she's just going to make things expensive and difficult. She's going to run you all out of money, and you're not going to get anywhere anyway. So, I mean, these are based on the decisions that are being made in court. The idea that precedent that's set in court has no influence on what happens below it is absolutely ridiculous. So yeah, it really does. We really do need to put pressure on, and not just, I mean, because you can go down layers and layers and layers and layers, because you're talking, we need new training for the judges and for the psychologists and the people doing the assessments and the guardians ad litem and all of those things. Well, we need different ways of teaching psychology in universities that aren't based on, you know, men are evil, corrupt patriarchs, and, you know, and abuse of women as some kind of normative patriarchal value, which is absolutely frickin' absurd. Less than 5% of Americans, when asked, think it's okay for a man to hit his wife to keep her in line. Okay, that doesn't even pass the 6% test. 6% of Americans believe they've been abducted by aliens. Is that a normative thing? Is that normative within American culture? So, I mean, give me a frickin' break. And, twice as many or more people think it's okay for a woman to hit her husband to keep him in line. So that's more normative in our culture. So, I mean, like this whole thing about we got to protect people from abuse. Nobody wants 50-50 shared custody to be forced on someone with an abusive partner. And that includes if the woman is the abusive partner. So, I mean, it's just ridiculous. It's ridiculous. It is so pathetic. And we get the politicians we deserve. So.
Thank you.
Thanks.
I appreciate you answering my
Sorry.
questions again. I was asked to. When the few questions ago, a woman asked about the term toxic masculinity, which I will completely agree. Why would anyone want to engage in a conversation where, like, why would men want to engage in a conversation where they're being blamed for everything?
Right.
No, nobody, like,
Yeah.
why? Like, why? So that being said, I was just wondering, I think that, correct me if I'm wrong, but you were saying that there's a redefinition of masculinity that feminists are trying to do. Is that a fair assessment?
I think they're trying to essentially redefine masculinity as whatever serves feminist interests.
Okay. Fair.
So.
Okay. So I think that there is a problem with masculinity currently, not just what feminists want it to be, but also as it is today. And
Okay. Go ahead.
well, just in terms of things you were saying, like the issues of fatherhood,
Right.
the
right.
issues of expectations, impossible expectations
Yes.
put on men, mental health issues, even young boys, like you were saying, like being forced to sit down.
Well, being
like,
given Ritalin
and Ritalin and all those
Adderall
things,
and-
and just like these impossible expectations.
Yeah.
Which I would say, perhaps you'll agree that they are part of what we expect men to be today, and what we expect masculinity to look like today, which is an impossible standard, right? It's impossible. Like most 4-year-old boys can't sit still, or 4-year-old girls can't sit still even. And I'm just wondering how you see the redefinition of masculinity that's going to be in a way that's healthy for men and good for men and good for society as a whole.
Well, I don't know. I don't know that masculinity needs to be, redefined. I don't think it's one specific thing. Like every man is different. Every man is in some ways self-defined. And so like I am not the person who is who is in the position where I should be saying, here's what I think men should be. I think that's men's job, mostly, I think, on an individual level, to define who they want to be. So.
But that would be a huge change, right? From what
Oh, to
masculinity
go
is
from
now,
something
right?
like where here's what society expects of you. I mean, like one of the things that people don't realize, that they don't know, is man used to be a gender neutral word. And the word for man was actually wereman, and the word for woman was wifman. And then at some point we just dropped the where from the man, and man became adult male, but also we tacked man onto a whole bunch of different words: fireman, policeman, ferryman. So men became what they did, right? They became what they did. And another interesting little tidbit of etymology is that the word girl used to just be gender neutral for child. And at some point, we started calling boys boys. And the word boy at that time meant servant or slave. So that's a little interesting. The expectations are really, really awful. And right now, there's no way for men to win. There's no way, because if you succeed, You've stolen that success from a woman who deserved it more. It's unearned. You were given that because of your privilege, right? It was handed to you. You didn't earn that. You took it away from a woman who deserved it more. And if you don't succeed, easy setting with all that male privilege, right? So there's no way for, like, no wonder men are going MGTOW. There's just, the rules of the game are such that there's no way for men to win. So, and even when they lose, they don't get sympathy because, hey, what a loser are you? You lost on the easy setting. So
men are kind of in this
catch
damned if
22.
you do, double bind, damned if
Oh,
you do,
yeah.
damned if you don't. Yeah, I mean, that makes total sense.
I think honestly, if we just got rid of the whole patriarchy narrative, men would be able to sort themselves out. You know, if we just got rid of that, because that's everywhere. That's everywhere. It's those men over there oppress their women, or those men back then oppressed their women. You know, it's like, and these men and women are still oppressed under this patriarchy that isn't really men, but it's named after men. Not just named after men, but named after fathers, which is quite pertinent to this talk. So yeah.
Okay, so I didn't realize there were so many questions. I appreciate.
Okay.
Hi there. So I'd like your thoughts on I guess a little hypothesis. I'm thinking that, do you think it's the case that hardcore misogynists and I guess misandrists are the products of abusive relationships with somebody of the opposite gender?
Oh, almost certainly. In particular, misandrists or misogynists. Misogynists aren't born, and they aren't inculcated by culture. They're made by the women in their lives, the women around them. And I've known, and the thing is that with, and there's not very many men out there who actually hate women. When I actually hear stories from people who send me emails, and they talk about some of their experiences with their mothers or their sisters or whatever, and just growing up in a incredibly toxic and abusive environment, they're more likely to actually grow up to be self-hating than to grow up and hating women. Real misogynist. Misandrists are a little bit different, like women who I think the second waivers took that whole make the personal, the political, they took it and they ran with it. And that just translates into, if my dad was an abusive shit, then all men are abusive shits. So.
Thank you.
Thanks.
So I was just wondering what you think the role of fatherlessness plays in school shootings.
Well, I don't.
Gun control issues aside, of course.
I don't know, because I haven't had time, and I was gonna try and fob the job off on somebody else, but I haven't had time to look into the family backgrounds of sort of the worst of the worst mass shooters, particularly young mass shooters. So I don't know what the proportion of school shooters and young men like Dylan Roof who go shoot up churches and things like that. I don't know the proportion of those that are fatherless. I've heard that it's disproportionate. But I think honestly, when you look at it, for every young man who picks up a gun or a weapon and kills somebody, there's something like 20 who pick up the gun or the knife or whatever and they kill themselves. So, and it seems like it's only when, and I'm stealing shamelessly from Allison right now, it seems like it's only when they hurt other people that we notice them. And so if that's the only way you're ever going to matter, and otherwise you're going to be ignored, then maybe that's what some of the more disturbed individuals are prepared to do. And the publicization of these mass shootings, all of the media around them and everything. I know that people are interested and horrified, and they want to hear about it, and they want to read about it, and they want to understand. But those kinds of big flashy news stories just inspire the next guy who feels like he might want to do it. So, and it's to get noticed, right? I am in so much pain that and nobody gives a shit, and I will cause as much pain as I can, and then people give a shit, and it seems to work. So.
I was also wondering what your perspective is on the role of stepfathers in the lives of young boys. Are boys that grow up in a house with a stepfather at a significant disadvantage than boys that live with their biological fathers, even if that stepfather sort of replaces the role of the biological father?
Depends on the stepfather, depends on the mother, and it really depends on the mother. It depends on the kid and how old and the kid's temperament and how old the kid is when the new man is introduced. If the boy or girl is a year old when stepdad comes in, and stepdad's a good stand-up guy, and mom is not. A lot of mothers do this weird thing where they want their cake and eat it too. So they want stepdad to be the dad right up until she disagrees with how he wants to parent. And then she pulls out the "they're not really your kids" card, right? And that just really messes up the whole idea of the blending of the family and the stability for the kid. So, I mean, it really depends on how it's done. It can be done.
What would be the best case scenario?
Best case scenario is, the very best case scenario is for the kid would be that his real father died in a way that he could be proud of. The stepfather came in very early, age 1, something like that, and was a really great dad. And the kid grew up knowing that his dad died in a way he could be proud of. But I mean, like, that happens almost never, right? Best case scenario, like, I can't really, like, and that's only because the kid will then know that my dad didn't choose to leave, and he will know that my mom didn't choose to get rid of my dad, right? And so so it's not that I want men to die, Robert, so don't twist my words when you come up to the mic. But I'm talking best case scenario for the child there. And that's just in terms of, like, it's difficult. It's really difficult in terms of how you go about it. And every kid is different. So I have a sister. She has 2 children, a son, and her son was about 7 or 8 when she met her new man, and her daughter was about 3. And he's bonded beautifully with this little girl. And between him and this boy, it's just been nothing but conflict and disagreement and strife and difficulty. And my sister does not help, because my sister pulls the "I'm the real mom" card, and I want you to love my son as if he's your own child. But I'm going to pull the "you're not his real dad" card all the time. So, yeah.
Thank you.
Okay.
I'd like to thank you for giving the talk that you did. Personally, I've never really encountered somebody who has spoken about a topic, an unusual topic such as this. I remember a friend of mine who got separated from his girlfriend, and he had a child. And unfortunately, the separation kind of ended on bitter terms. So the mother kind of tried her best to make sure that the father did not get any sort of custody or things like that. And there were also times where she just disappeared,
and never showed up, and that like the father kept fighting and he never really got close to it, and months passed by and he would not see his son. And even the court did not favor anything. Like it was just like everything was going against him. And then I remember he posted something on Facebook, and he was just asking his friends that, you know, like he made this website that kind of like allows somebody to you know, get money for charity or for a cause. So he made that, and he was asking his friends maybe if they can contribute to for the money for the lawyer, because he did not have enough money to even fight for his custody. So it was really sad to see that kind of a thing. But my question to you, I have two questions from you.
Okay.
So I'm in public policy. What I study here is public policy and administration.
Right.
And you know, I mean, I don't really know yet what, but maybe if you can provide some recommendations, because everything, like you said, there's all these systematic errors, right?
Yeah.
That is kind of making these things happening. And the only thing, as far as from what I have understood, is that if one thing, it's not the law really, it's these policies that make systematic changes.
Right.
Laws kind of like they're permanent, and then you know, it takes 4 or 5 years for a law to be implemented, and you know, but once a policy is kind of in place, then it kind of acts according to the situation. So what policy recommendations you know, would you recommend that could kind of help you know, guide this in the right direction?
Well, I think honestly, we need to be rewriting the training manuals and the training materials for all of the people involved. And we need to be consulting more recent research and more varied research than the one book that one feminist wrote that we're basing our custody arrangements on. And but policy is difficult to deal with too, because it's not up for public scrutiny before it gets implemented. It's not like a law that gets debated and they put it up and people can read what it is, and it's not going to be challenged constitutionally. It's less likely than a law to be challenged on that basis. So recommendations, if you want my recommendations as like, you know, what should the policies be and what should they say, I would say a rebuttable presumption of shared custody unless it's impossible because one parent is so psychotic that they can't be trusted around the kids, or unless one of them has said that they don't want it. So, I mean, that's essentially, I mean, the assumption should be, the starting point should be that both parents are going to want a significant amount of parenting time. And I think, honestly, if we're going to say that, well, when fathers do an equal amount of childcare during the marriage, then, you know, then maybe they'll get an equal shake in family court. Well, okay, so shouldn't we have said, well, when women go off to war, then they can get the vote? You know, like, or, you know, when women change themselves in this way or that way, then maybe we'll give them the right to do that. I mean, we're putting men in a double bind even in their families, in the sense that I think most men know that if something went wrong with the marriage, they would not be the primary or shared parent, right? Like they would not be, they would lose custody or lose most custody rights. And so maybe some men are standoffish with their kids because they know that's like, I know men who have been the primary parent who had their parental rights completely, well, not completely stripped, but they got every other weekend status. So, you know, it's primary caregiver fathers who did not get primary custody after the divorce. So.
Yeah, I mean, there are also like all these lawyers, right, who are working.
Oh, it's so much of it is money with the lawyers. Like I said, a winner takes all system means that both parents are going to be fighting, and that's just That's a yacht, that's a Mercedes, that's, new redecorated offices. That's all kinds of things for lawyers. Of course, they're going to want to keep the system the way it is. And courts, your friend, even if he manages to get custody, courts aren't particularly interested in enforcing it. There's plenty of money for the system in enforcing child support, because every dollar of child support that gets extracted is, some social benefit or some welfare payment or something that they don't have to hand to the mother. They can deduct some of that off of money that they're giving these mothers. But there's no money in enforcing custody. That's just all red ink. So.
Okay, and my second question is, it's kind of more at a personal level. I mean, you don't have to answer this, but I just want to know what personally inspired you to kind of get into this realm of field where you felt, I mean, to write about things like this, and I'm just curious about what inspired you.
Well, I stumbled across a men's website. I talked to the men there. It was pretty rough. They were a rough crowd, but I learned a lot about what's going on inside what men don't actually tell people, right? Like what's going on in their heads and in their hearts that they don't tell people because people don't want to hear it. And that I found so refreshing and so interesting. And so much of it was just absolutely just heartbreaking. It was heartbreaking to hear their stories in their own words. And so I just said, well, a lot of this is because of things like the courts and law and erosion of due process and social attitudes and things that I could help with. And so and I have boys too. I have 2 sons. I have a boyfriend. I have an ex-husband I care about. I have a father. I have cousins and uncles that I care about. And I think that they all deserve somebody who might want to speak on their behalf. I mean, they're not going to do it because nobody wants to hear this kind of stuff from a man. So, which is kind of the handicap that men have. Nobody wants to hear it from a man, especially you, Robert.
Okay.
All right. Are you my last question, or are you just bringing up the rear to take the microphone away?
You might want to hope so.
Oh, dear.
But I'm not going to ask the one about why you want to murder men. I'll leave.
Oh, yeah, no, I don't want to murder men. Just you, Robert.
I feel honored, or at least special. Much of what you've been talking about tonight in terms of fatherlessness, I think falls under the larger framework of reproductive rights.
Yes.
Women have a lot of reproductive rights.
They have all the reproductive rights. They're the only ones with reproductive rights.
Men have no reproductive rights.
Well, you can keep it in your pants, and that's about it. If you use a condom, she can just, once you throw it in the trash, it's hers to do with what she wants.
That's a bigger topic. I agree with you wholeheartedly about it. It's a bigger topic than my question. But my question revolves around that a little bit, and that is when a man does become a parent and he's not told, he doesn't know.
It's very difficult, yeah.
Yeah, it's not just difficult, but there's a name for it. It's called paternity fraud. Paternity fraud, from my understanding, happens about 10% of the time in all births throughout Canada. Do you have a position on how to deal with it? And maybe even go into a little bit about the consequences of what happens when someone falsely claims either no father or the wrong father.
Okay, well, you have to make a little bit of room for the, I hope, small, tiny percentage of women out there who have babies who have absolutely no clue who the father is. I hope it's a small percentage. That they, got knocked up in a nightclub bathroom or something like that.
There might be a way of figuring that out, though.
Sorry?
There might be a way of figuring out which one it is.
Well, if you have mandatory DNA testing at birth and DNA registration for everybody, yeah, you could do that. But I don't know, it seems a little invasive to have mandatory DNA testing of you'd have to get a lot of agreement on the ground for something like that to be. I don't want to have somebody be able to track my DNA and my Waddy Kleenexes that I leave a trail of in garbage cans everywhere. But paternity fraud is it's a big issue because it's not just that one man is defrauded out of his chance to be a father. It's another man is being defrauded out of his investment in a child that he believes is his. So it is fraud. It is absolutely fraud, but the law doesn't really see it that way. And there are people I know who, the wife and the biological father are living together, they may be married, right? And the ex-husband, who is not the father, is still paying for the kid because the kid was born before she and he divorced. And so she's getting free money from a man who is never a father to this child, never played a fatherly role. The kid was born in the middle of a divorce, right? While she was with the kid's father's not paying for it. The man who was married to the woman is paying for it. So, I mean, it's a really, really complicated, stupid system. And don't even get me started on California and what default judgments of paternity. What a friggin' nightmare that is. So.
Very thoughtful, and thank you.
All right, that's it. Okay, awesome.
So I'd like to thank everybody for coming out tonight to the Men's Issues Awareness at York University inaugural event. And a special thanks to Karen for speaking so eloquently this evening. For those of you who are York students and otherwise, you can always sign up for the email list so you can be notified of any future events if you're interested in coming. And yeah, thanks again for attending tonight, and have a great evening, everybody. Yeah.
Hi, everybody. So I have the sign-up sheet with me. If you would like to sign up for every upcoming event we have, we're going to send you an email. So if you want to just come up front and write your name and your email, and then we can get to you whenever we have another event like this. Thank you.
All right, guys. Looks like everyone's wrapping up now. So just lower this a bit so you guys don't have too much of that background noise. So yeah, feel free to join Hannah on the after show. She's got some stuff planned for discussion if you're a patron, and if you're not, please consider becoming a patron at www.patreon.com/honeybadgerradio. And we will see you guys next time.